Okay, so now we're going to do, and this is also going to be a fairly brief review, we're going to talk about the large types of elements. Okay, so there are 4 types of elements we're going to talk about, 4 large groups. The metals. And the metals are not just the things you think are metals. Okay? Iron, copper, gold, everybody gets that those are metals, but sodium, potassium, calcium, those are metals too. And basically the metals are everything on this side. We'll be color coding these when we get to chapter 4. We'll get out the colored pencils and you'll color in the metals. But metals in general, they're good conductors of everything. Heat, electric, they conduct current. They are typically solid at room temperatures, and they can be pounded into thin sheets. And the ability to create foils, the ability to create, this is a relatively thin sheet, that's all down to this quality of metals that they're malleable. It actually has to do with how the atoms inside that substance are bonded together. They undergo a special form of bonding, and that allows them to keep their forces of attraction even when they're pounded out thin. They're ductile. We can pull it into a wire. Most of the civilization that we're living in right now depends on this. What metal's inside here? What is it, Tyler? Copper, yeah. All the flow of electrons, all the information, all of that stuff, so much of it comes down to copper wire at this point. Now there's also fiber optic cable, there are things like that. But metal's ability to do that enables a lot of the world that you're seeing around you. If you crack open your phone, you're going to see copper wire and connections. And that's enabling this whole thing. Copper's used in wiring. Lithium is another metal. That's used to treat bipolar disorder. Calcium is a metal. It's used to treat a variety of conditions in humans. And there are a lot of metals that are important in the body, biologically. Sodium and potassium and calcium. If your blood levels of those metals get out of whack, some pretty bizarre things can happen. Years ago, someone who I love very much was having issues with excess calcium in the blood. And I can tell you that the symptoms of excess calcium in the blood look a lot like super fast, like crazy fast onset of Alzheimer's. Like suddenly someone who's a really bright person can't remember who you are or is confused every second of the day. It's a metal in the blood circulating because your body depends on those metals to make connections. They're out of whack, everything goes haywire. If you have a sibling, you might have a sibling who is everything you are not. I've seen sibling pairs like this. I've had sibling pairs like this. I never judge anybody by their siblings because you can be night and day. And I have seen sibling pairs where I had one who I thought, my God, if I could clone you, like super responsible, friendly, helpful, kind, hardworking, smart, athletic, nice, just like everything that you would ever want anybody to be. And their other sibling, maybe not a nice person, but like no ambition whatsoever. Not doing it. Maybe didn't have the material, but if they did have the material, not really doing anything. Doesn't really care. No, that's okay. No, don't need to. That's okay. Like, whoa, you two are related. Okay. This is the story of metals and nonmetals. Every single characteristic that metals exhibit, the malleability, the ductility, the conductivity, all of that. Nonmetals are exactly the opposite. So, metals are conductive. Nonmetals are great insulators. We use nonmetals as insulators very commonly because they are lousy conductors of heat, they are lousy conductors of electric. Most of them are most metals are solids at room temperature, they tend to have really high melting points. It takes a lot of energy to melt gold, copper, iron, etc. Most of these nonmetals are gases at room temperature. In order to get them to liquefy or solidify, you have to lower the temperature dramatically. Now, there aren't as many of the nonmetals as there are of the metals. And actually, the nonmetals just take up sort of this little corner over here. There's a handful of them. Some of them are fairly important to us. I'm a big fan of oxygen myself. Nitrogen and carbon, you are carbon-based life forms, Actually, those three elements right there, as well as being major components of the atmosphere, are major components of you. What is it that the state of Ohio used to say that biology students had to know? That all the life on Earth is primarily composed of 6 elements. And it was carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and hydrogen. And guess what? Well, they're all nonmetals. You're a nonmetal kind of creature. The things that primarily make up the life forms that we're familiar with are nonmetals. So they're kind of important to us. And then we have the neither fish nor fowl. So if you have 3 siblings and you have 2 who are night and day, and you've got one who you could definitely see that sibling A is related to sibling B, and you can definitely see that sibling C is related to sibling B. A and B, I don't know how those 2 came out of the same gene pool. That's the metalloids. They're the middle ground. They have some characteristics of metals. They have some of nonmetals. A lot of them, and again, copper is real important to the world in which we live. So is one particular metalloid, and that would be silicon. Actually, your cell phone is enabled not only by copper, but by silicone chips. How many of you have heard the whole, when I was your age, speech about computers? Okay. So I'm going to give you that speech squared. My dad was an old math teacher, born at the start of World War II, and went to the biggest air base in Europe in the 1960s. And it's an air base the size of, like, a small city in Ohio. And they ran at that air base all of the data processing for the entire Air Force presence in Europe. This was in the 1960s. We're 20 years out from the end of World War II. There was a lot of U.S. military involvement in Europe. We had bases all over Europe at the time. A lot of them have since been shut. The computers that managed all of that took up, it would have probably been both floors of this high school, all of the space, end to end, end to end, up and down. Massive, big, humming machines with magnetic tape and cards. And you have more memory in your pocket. You have more computer processing ability and more memory on the phone that's in your pocket or your purse than that entire building full of machines did in the mid-1960s. My dad used to say this when pointing at the desktop computer in the 1980s, which of course you've seen. It was a big clunky thing with a giant screen and a CPU that would have taken up half this desk. We will finish this tomorrow. We will start your lab on Friday. Have a wonderful day, folks.